Welcome to Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, the podcast that uses music to inspire us in the struggle against climate change. Songs to warm your soul so you can help cool the world.
First, we're going to play a little bit of Bumblebee in a Jug.
Hi, I'm Warren Sanders, and this is Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, special episode 16 on bees. We led off with champion old-timey fiddler Henry Barnes playing Bumblebee in a Jug, and we're going to be hearing music from all over the world inspired by bumblebees over the next 10 or 12 minutes. We're also going to meet a bumblebee scientist who can tell us more about what's going on in the minds of these creatures as they move from blossom to blossom. But before we do that, we have to get Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov and his Flight of the Bumblebee out of the way. There's an incredible YouTube rabbit hole that you can go down where people play that iconic piece of super fast music on every instrument imaginable and some instruments you can't even begin to imagine. I've just chosen to play them all at once. I hope you enjoy this super fast mashup, which to my ears sounds remarkably like a swarm of bees in action. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's meet Jessica Braun, a bumblebee scientist from the University of Nevada. With me today is Jessica Braun. Jessica is a PhD student at the University of Nevada, and she studies bumblebees and plant chemistry, with particular emphasis on issues of bumblebee behavior, memory, and the effects of climate change. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now, straight out of Milwaukee in the early 1950s, the Polka Rascals with Bumblebee Polka. What's it like being a bumblebee expert in the world today?
I have a wonderful dream job. I do a mixture of lab and field-based work. Currently, I'm working on a more lab-based project with bumblebees. We actually rear bumblebees in our lab, and I've been working on a project looking at the combination of nectar chemicals and heat waves and how that affects bumblebee learning, memory, activity, and then their lifespans as well.
How did you discover that this was the thing that you wanted to do?
I fell in love with bees in my undergraduate education. My advisor asked me if I wanted to help him bring bees onto campus, and so I helped him do a little beekeeping with honeybees, and I absolutely fell in love.
This episode of Cool Tunes probably has the single greatest diversity of sound sources. Up next, the 1909 Bumblebee Rag by E. Clinton Keithley, played on a genuine player piano. Your affection for the bees is very clear.
Oh, I do love them. Especially when I'm, doing these like learning and memory work with them, you kind of get to know each individual's bee's personality a little bit, and some are kind of stubborn and some are really eager and motivated. So yeah, I do get to know them as individuals a little bit, even though they are.
Are there any like bee prodigies?
Some of them knock it out of the park. They learn immediately. They remember. They're little rock stars. Yeah. Yeah.
In India, where I lived for a number of years, the bumblebees are black and very large, and they move in this endearingly clumsy way from blossom to blossom. There's lots of music in the Indian subcontinent that draws on bee imagery, and we're going to start up north in the state of Kashmir. We'll listen to Ghulam Nabi playing Bumbaro Bumbaro on the sarang. You use the phrase bumblebee memory. Bumblebees aren't very big. How do their brains work?
It's a great question. Insects and bees in particular have really rich and complex cognition. They have a lot of sensory processing, in many ways richer than ours. And they have their little bee brains in which they can store, information and memory. And they actually have really, really high levels of learning and memory, which is important when they're out foraging. They need to be able to remember the good flowers, the bad flowers, where home is, all of these things, and they store it all in their little brains.
How do you find out? I mean, you can't, give them a multiple choice exam or a...
You know what? We actually kind of do. So it's a pretty simple little experiment where little strips of paper in two different colors, let's say blue and yellow, and you can dip one of them in sugar water and the other one in just plain water. And so let's say blue is rewarding to them. It's got the sugary treat. And I let them taste both. And I do that a few times. And eventually I can test them by giving them both at the same time and seeing which one they choose. And they're very good at this. They will often kind of look at both, lock onto the one that they know, that they remembered it has the sugary treat, and they will run towards it with their little tongue, their little proboscis already sticking out. It's absolutely adorable. And so then we know that bee has learned that, that color is the rewarding one, which is kind of analogous to how they might process flowers in the meadow. And then we can test memory by doing it again the next day and seeing if she still picks the right one. So.
In a lot of Indian poetry, the bumblebee is linked by analogy with Lord Krishna, who in his post-adolescent days was a considerable flirt. Krishna moved from girl to girl in much the same way that the bumblebee moves from flower to flower. In this next song, an excerpt from Bumbaro Bumbaro from the hit Hindi film Mission Kashmir, the men are dressed in black and they dance around the women, treating them just like blossoms. Enjoy.
जैकेट निकालो
In the Indian classical tradition that I studied, there are certain ragas or scale types which are specifically for the spring season, and it's unsurprising that the bumblebee makes its appearance as part of the lyrics of these songs which celebrate spring and the activities of the birds, the bees, and the flowers. Here's Shashank Maktedar singing the opening verses of a Khayal song in the raga Bahar.
कलियन संग करता रंगरलिया भवर गुजार फूले फुलवार चहुर मोर बोले कोयल की कूक सुनी कूक उठी कलियन संग करता रंगरलिया
The black bumblebee also has a role in religion. In the Devi Bhagavata Purana, one of the sacred texts of Hinduism, the story is told of demon Arunasura, who had been granted a boon by the gods that he could not be vanquished by any 2- or 4-legged creature. I bet you can figure out where this is headed. As Arunasura wreaked havoc on earth, the goddess Adi Parashakti figured out how to defeat him. and in a battle she emanated waves of bees from her hands, creating a swarm that stung Arunasura and his minions to death. In her bee-manifesting avatar, Adiparashakti is now known as Bramhari Devi. Bramhari Devi is worshipped in multiple temples in the state of Andhra Pradesh, and especially in the city of Kateel, where she is known as Brahmari Shri Durga Parameshwari. At the temple in Kateel, these stories of how demon Arunasura was defeated are enacted by devotees who hurl torches at one another and dance the legends out. There's also developed a beautiful devotional song form in the Tulu language, in which the singers recount the exploits of goddess Bramhari Devi and her defeat of the demon Arunasura. Here's a mashup of a few of those songs to give you an idea. Two dancers portraying demon Arunasura and a bee. The bee wins. Notice the subtle video manipulation in which the bee transforms into goddess Bramhari Devi. Here, devotees are hurling torches at one another, reenacting that great mythological battle. Finally, let's head back to the southern United States and hear Bumblebee Blues from the great guitarist Tampa Red, along with a discussion of buzz pollination with Jessica Braun. I learned relatively recently about this fascinating phenomenon called buzz pollination, which struck me as being remarkably like what musicians do when they have a gig.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a widespread skill, if you will, that many different kinds of bees can do. Notably, honeybees cannot do it. But what buzz pollination is, the bee will go up to a flower and she will bite down on the anthers of the flower with her little mandibles, and she'll detach her wing muscles that normally control the wings for flying. She'll detach them from her wings and then rapidly contract those muscles, which creates this kind of deep buzz that occurs at basically just the right frequency to shake the pollen loose. And since this was, music focused, I looked into it and I found that apparently this buzzing occurs at roughly the range of the musical notes A or middle C.
Awesome.
But bees do this with many plants where they'll just, kind of use that to help shake the pollen loose. But about 8% of plants, it's really the only way to get the pollen out. And so you can think of the anther as kind of built like a little salt shaker where the pollen is, kind of stuck inside, but there's little holes, and it only will come out for the bee if the bee shakes that little anther just right. They're meant for each other. And we need this to happen for some of our food products. And so some of the plants that require buzz pollination are things like tomatoes, blueberries, and kiwis, to name just a few out of many. And so if we didn't have, buzz pollinators doing their little thing, then we wouldn't have those foods. And so bumblebees are often responsible for pollinating them.
I asked Jessica if she had any artists or musicians she'd like to recommend.
I do have an artist I wanted to shout out because she actually did a collaboration with my advisor a few years back and produced this whole really incredible art installation based on bees. And so her name is Jessica Rath, and the art installation is called A Better Nectar. And so she built like a human-sized model of a bumblebee nest, for example, so you can really like get in there and, you know, kind of feel what it feels like to be a bee. And she actually built sculptures based on buzz pollination, and so the anthers, she like built some of those like in larger form so we can kind of get a feeling for what they look like. And then she also produced some music pieces with a collaborator and a composer. And so there, you know, there's a few that are kind of you know, give you the feelings of what it feels like in, you know, in with the flowers and in with the hive. There's that music that kind of really illustrates that feeling. So I just wanted to shout that out because I thought that was so cool.
Our next guest started the World Honey Exchange as a way to build sustainable marketing of honey from all over the planet. He makes unusual honeys available to food markets in the U.S. while ensuring fair trade relationships and environmentally responsible harvesting. But before we meet Brian and hear about the World Honey Exchange, I want to play you a short snippet of sound from my friend and colleague Michelle Keithley, who lived with the BaAka Pygmies in the Central African rainforest for several years and wrote a fine book, Seize the Dance. I asked her about the pygmies and honey, and she sent me this audio clip. Michelle commented about this song in a private email. Of course, climbing for honey is a big deal. There's one short song, an esime song, that's a kind of rhythmic interlude in between the other songs of a dance for the women's dance Elamba. The words are funny. Literally, they say, some guys can climb and get the honey, others botch it up. Getting honey is used as an euphemism for scoring, so to speak, so the double entendre is amusing. This is sung by all the women. With me today is Brian Woerner. Brian is the founder of the World Honey Exchange to talk with me about honey and about how this all intersects with the worlds of climate change, music, and bees. Brian, welcome. It's great to have you.
Hi, Warren. Nice to meet you, and thanks for having me.
How long have human beings been using honey?
Forever. I mean, like, we were out foraging, right?
Right.
I mean, there's pictures in ancient tombs in Egypt of depicting beekeeping. I mean, even domestication of bees has been going on for thousands of years.
And honey is not just a food, right? It has other uses, right?
Right. I mean, some medicine of all kinds. It's antiseptic. It's full of sugar, so it's hard for things to grow.
Blues giant Muddy Waters with a 1970 performance in Germany of his 1951 hit, Honeybee. Brian, how did the World Honey Exchange begin?
I started out beekeeping in West Africa. That's where I learned about the foundational levels of beekeeping or honey hunting. There's a feeling of going and getting fresh honey, honeycomb, directly out of a hive, and there's a different experience around it than eating it out of a jar. It's tactile, right? You're interacting. You might even get stung on the way. It's a much more vivid interaction to go out and actually work with bees, know where honey's coming from. That is, understand the kind of the biodiversity that is coming from in an area, as well as the community that's out actually working with these bees.
Right.
Technologies are vastly different from, where I was working in Guinea to Tanzania and East Africa, to Central and Southern India, to, here in the U.S.
Right. Selling locally sourced woodland honey can be a life-saving income stream for many villages.
Part of that started from me doing work in Tanzania around the Miombo woodlands, which are native to Central Africa. Large biodiversity hotspots. So that's what I was seeing, was these woodlands being cut down and people are growing corn and beans, and you can't really fault people for it. I mean,
Right.
they live by the same economic rules that we do. And so from that, I realized too that, okay, if there's not a market for the forest products, honey being a major one in that area, what alternative is there to sort of cutting this down and doing something else? I mean, hopefully, right, if people have a market that's reliable for their forest product, then
They don't need to cut it down.
hopefully they're at least disincentivized to some extent
Right.
from chopping it down.
For bees, for honey, as for all earthly life, diversity is the rule, not the exception. What's the most unusual honey that you can think of?
I'd love to get up into the high Himalayas and dig out some of the rhododendron honey that is eaten locally, ritualistically as an aphrodisiac. It makes you hallucinate. It can kill you if you eat too much. So there's granotoxins in this piece of rhododendron nectar, and the bees forage that nectar, and that gets turned into honey. I mean, honey is a capsule of a time and place. It's a place in that, well, whatever's growing there and whatever those bees are foraging from at that given time. So when that's harvested, that's a picture of what they foraged in that place at that time. And it'll never be the same because of changing seasons, right? What's flowering in a given area at a given time, which is dependent on the rainfall and the soil structure.
Apiculture has been a part of human civilization for thousands of years, with the earliest written records going back to around 1600 BC. Here's the German medieval ensemble Die Irrlichter performing Lorcher Bienensegen, the Lorsch Bee Blessing, a musical setting of a 9th century poem in Old High German. Domesticated honeybees pollinate big parts of our food chain, but they're in danger from disease and mistreatment. What can ordinary citizens do to slow this down?
I think it's just good to know where your food comes from. Like, I'll hear people say they don't eat honey because it's an animal product, but they're happy to eat almonds, which are a byproduct of pollination from those bees that, have been shipped in. How many have died on that way, or how much disease is spread from putting them in close proximity? That's not a question. It's just that the bee produced the honey. So even if a beekeeper handles that hive with immense care, right, and produces that honey, and way less bees are harmed in that process, it's still an animal product. It's a matter of trying to reach a little bit further up the chain of where your food comes
Devoting
from.
a little more bandwidth to those kinds of questions.
I think that's
eating unthinkingly.
Yeah, and that's food in general, right? And it doesn't have to be honey. I think because bees apply to our whole food system, right? They're kind of a primary thing when you think about pollination. We depend on them.
The Reverend Charles Butler was a grammarian, a scholar of rhetoric and oratory, but perhaps best known as the father of British beekeeping. He used his listening skills and musical ear to hear bees' feelings. His book about his experience, The Feminine Monarchy, was published in 1609, and it's perhaps the first multimedia publication in history. I'm talking today with Dr. Jennifer Richards. She is spearheading research and documentation project in the life and work of the English polymath and beekeeper Charles Butler. Dr. Richards, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Well, what drew me to this project, and the reason why we are so interested in Charles Butler, is how he used sound and music to understand the behavior and the emotions of bees. And that led to this multidisciplinary project whereby you have humanists, both musicologists and literary scholars, working alongside scientists, entomologists who have an interest in the emotions of bees.
Am I correct? He took his musical instrument out to the beehive and transcribed what the queen bee did?
Yes. So he is one of the first people to confirm the sex of the dominant bee in a honeybee hive. He writes in his preface to The Feminine Monarchy that he decided to leave his books in the study and go out into the field to understand bee behavior differently. With an early modern hive, a skep, which is basically an upside down basket, you can't get inside. So his way of getting inside the hive was to take a musical instrument, probably a recorder, we think, and notate what he heard. But he's particularly interested in the hooting and quacking that the virgin queens make just before swarming. He notated it, and he has, in the 1609 edition of The Feminine Monarchy, he has 2 staves where he's basically notating what he has heard. So you've got 2 virgin queens, one emerged from the cell, one still in the cell. So the 2 staves of piping suddenly become a song, a bee song for 4 voices. So you kind of go into his book as if it's a hive and imagine you're listening to or even perform as a bee. And I find that a very interesting way of thinking about a book.
You can hear for yourself how accurate Butler's transcription of the honeybee queen's piping was, thanks to this video from honeyflow.com in Australia. Frame drummer Lane Redmond was one of the great virtuosi on her instrument. She spent much of her professional life researching the history of the frame drum and teaching others about the ancient traditions of women's drumming. Her book, When the Drummers Were Women, was published in 1997. In 2008, she was facing a cancer diagnosis and drew inspiration from a friend's bees. She tuned her drums to their buzzing and turned the music she heard into a masterpiece, Hymns from the Hive. What can you tell me about the impact of climate change? How does that map out in your terms?
It's climate change that's pushing people into ecosystems. It's more human destruction of habitat to make our agricultural products efficient and cost effective. So one of the downsides of that is you're not going to get really diverse honeys that come out of forests and all these diverse flowering and blooming seasons and flavor profiles of those botanicals that are all kind of rolling like a wave through seasonality. Bees prefer to have a diet that is well-rounded.
Diversity is good for us.
It is.
Bees,
It's
good for us.
Diversity of diet is very important. So as our population grows or moves to more friendly climes to deal with that temperature change, we are kind of mowing down habitat that's great for honeybees or native bees.
What are some of the things that are putting our bee populations in danger? And what can ordinary people like me do about it?
As you said, there are many dangers, climate change being one of them. There are a few others like diseases. Bees get sick just like we do. There are invasive species that can interfere with them. Obviously, pesticides is a huge one that we have introduced into their lives. But the biggest one overall is habitat loss because of us. And so that is by far the largest, problem that faces them. But we kind of think of it in the insect world as like death by 1,000 cuts. It's all of these things kind of working together, unfortunately, that can be a big problem. The best thing that we can do as individuals to try and help bees, I always say, is to plant native pollinator-friendly plants and also to advocate for pollinator-friendly spaces in parks or campuses or wherever you can, and then also reducing pesticide use whenever possible, and also supporting government representatives that really care about wildlife is a big one too.
Lane Redmond died in 2013. I was in high school when I first heard Terry Riley's seminal composition, In C, one of the founding documents of the musical school that's now called minimalism. With dozens of tiny musical motifs, each obeying the same strict rules but interacting unpredictably with one another, the composition sounds like an audio analog to watching bees interacting with one another inside a hive. In 2021, as part of the Music for Climate Justice program, I caught up with Terry Riley and his collaborator Sarah Miyamoto in Japan, and Terry contributed this wonderful humorous piece called Burt's Bees.
Hi, this is Terry Riley with the lovely Sarah Miyamoto here in Japan. This is our group Everything and Beyond, performing a piece called Burt's Bees. If we love humanity's music, art, and culture, please join me in advocating for climate justice. Preserve this wonderful life on Earth for our descendants. Thank you very much.
This has been Cool Tunes for a Hot Planet, Episode 16. I'm Warren Senders. Thank you for joining us.
I am the bee. Pollinate truth if you choose to see. Pollinate the youth to truly be free. Pollinate love, let's all agree. I am the bee. Now keystone species, we need these bees, honey. They pollinate most of the things you eat. Funny, they do this for free without a fee. Billions in produce produced nationally. Now millions of bees have abandoned their hives. If they disappear in 4 years, human race will die. That's a quote from a famous scientist like Einstein. It's logical to anyone with half a mind, man. It's horrible where you think you're gonna run and hide. It's possible for us to combine and stop these lies. Respect all lives wherever it resides, whether plant, algae, bacteria, or fungi. That's right, it's time for us to vocalize, cause if the bees die, then we too die. That's right, it's time for us to strategize, cause if the bees die, then we too die. I am the bee. Pollinate truth if you choose to see. Pollinate the youth to truly be free. Pollinate love, let's all agree. I am the bee, am the bee.
Please like and subscribe and spread the word about this podcast to your friends who'd be interested. See you next time.